Hey, so this is my platform and game engine that I'm working on, and yeah, so to get to this point to understand the code that's in this thing, and this is going to be available on the GameMaker marketplace, and so you can bring your coding to that next level, and it's all the coding is commented on. Anyway, that's in the future to come, so stay tuned for this. Hey, how you doing? So this is Neil. Have you ever written code like this and yeah, it works, and you're like, cool, that's awesome, because you're watching and following along like a Shaun Spalding or Heartbeats video, which are great, awesome tutorials. But what I find is that oftentimes these great tutorials don't go into the most basic stuff to understand what is happening in this code. Do you know how to use the sign anywhere else? Do you know exactly what this is doing? What about this line here? Do you know exactly what this line is doing and why this line is necessary with this line? You know, what's happening here? Well, by the time this video is over, you're gonna not only are you going to understand all of this, what it all means exactly, so that you can use this in other parts of different code that you write for yourself that you're not following along with somebody else to write. You'll understand all this code on a more fundamental level, like everything. By the time you're done with this video, when you go back and rewatch Shaun Spalding's tutorials or Heartbeats or other tutorials, you're going to understand them on a much deeper level and be able to code much better, and then you'll be able to bring that into your own games. So all right, let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that's really important to understand is that when you're talking to a computer, why are we even writing any of this code? Why does any of this code look the way it does? Because the computer's stupid. It can only understand yes, no. That's pretty much it. However, that gets a little more complicated because it could understand yes, no with a couple gates that ultimately give it a this or that answer at the end. So basically with yes or no and using, and I highly recommend, really quickly, highly recommend at least watching the beginning, the first few, until you get to where it gets into gates of computer chips, of the crash course on YouTube called Computer Science. Super awesome to understand how a computer is able to process, and this is true for modern computers. It really does very basic stuff. The processor does yes, no, basic arithmetic like adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, and it does and or with XOR, base if functions. It processes very simple stuff, and it has to do a whole bunch of this processing to understand code. And so therefore it's binary code. We're actually feeding it binary code, but we're not directly, because this isn't binary code. So this is transformed into another more fundamental form of code, like machine code, and then eventually it goes down into binary code so the computer can understand any of the stuff you write. So it's important to understand that, so that when you start to write this code out, you're going to want to write it out thinking about this, that hey, the computer needs to understand everything I'm telling it to do. And so if you tell it move right, it needs to know, do I keep moving right? Do I stop? If you tell it to, if you're going to say VSP, that is your vertical speed, you're going to tell it X or Y, sorry, Y is negative whatever, and then it's going to fall back down. You need to tell it how to fall back down, and that it needs to fall back down. So that's what we're going to go ahead and start to understand in this here. I'm going to go ahead and erase this right now because we don't need it yet, but we will need it later. I'm going to erase this too, which we'll need later. All right, so the first thing is, I think we can start with like basic movement, so we can begin to understand this more fundamental stuff, and then we'll move into that code you just saw. And also I think it's important too to kind of understand on a logical level what's happening with the D&D. That's kind of important. You can understand that. You can like convert it to GML and see, oh, that's how it did that. But first, let's go ahead and start with the most basic stuff, which is just basic movement. To do that, we're going to need a sprite. I've already drawn a sprite in here. I can show you guys how to redraw this. So just double click on the sprite here. If you don't know how to use GML yet, then I'm going to take you through like what to click on. But make sure that when you open up GML or you open up GameMaker, that you click on the GML, not the D&D, not the drag and drop. Okay, so I'm going to try to, like I said, take you through this best I can, but I highly recommend watching GameMaker Studio's videos that show their interface and how all this works. But under sprites here, there won't be nothing here yet, so you want to right click on it and create a sprite. And in fact, I'll just do that right now really quick. It only takes a second. So let's just delete this. Right click on sprites, create a sprite. Comes up like this. In this top left right here, we're going to put this in middle center. And the reason why we're going to put this in middle center is this is where the computer is going to read your X and Y position from. It's going to read it from here, from the middle of your character. If you read it from the top left and you do something like flip your X scale, it's going to flip from here rather than from here. So it's going to look strange when it flips. It's going to flip like a book from this being the center binding, and it's going to flip over and look strange. I can show you what that looks like if I remember. So let's go ahead and add an image or edit image to do something with this. If you hold down the control key and then use your scroll wheel, you can zoom in and out that way. We're going to grab the paint bucket tool. We're just going to grab a kind of a dull blue color here. Double click on the color here to bring up the options. I'm going to make this a little bit darker, and I'm going to make it a little bit more saturated just because I don't want it so saturated. That way it's not so bright. That's pretty much all you need to do here. Then you need to go to objects. Now I have an object already, player. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. We'll create another object here. So right click on object and get create object. From over here where it says no sprite, just click on that area, and now this brings up the sprites. You can see the sprite we just created called sprite 0. I'm not going to rename it right now because I'm just trying to do this to show you the basics of coding. We're not actually going to code anything that you want to like keep or hold on to. This isn't that kind of tutorial. This is to understand the fundamentals of coding. Sorry about my cat, he's being a weirdo. Alright, so object I'm going to rename. I'm going to right click on it and then click rename, or you can highlight it with the left mouse click and then hit F2, and then I'm going to just call this object obj underscore player. And now it's named. Now then we can double click on that. Actually it's already up, so then you want to click on add event. So here we can do a create event, or we can do a step event. In this case we're going to do a step event. But before we do a step event, a lot of people when they first start learning GameMaker, they learn this way. And there's a lot of tutorials, actually beginning tutorials that teach it this way. And I don't see the point because I haven't seen any of them that teach what this is actually doing and why they're doing this. So first, let's start with this step event here. This will make sense in a second if it doesn't now. Oh, that's right. I'm still on a, I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to pause real quick. I'm going to come back to everything I just did, but I'm going to do this as a GML because I don't want it to keep converting everything I create. I guess it's not a big deal. I'm just going to right click on this. I was doing another video, so I'm just going to convert to GML. You don't have to do that because you're already in GML. Now if you hold down the control key here and use your scroll button, you can zoom in and out of these windows, and it makes it a little bit bigger if you need to be bigger. I'm going to make it bigger so you guys can see what it is I'm typing and doing. So the first thing we're going to want to do is move our character left or right, and understanding what any of this means. I think this is a good place to start, what any of this means. Now, we've already actually written code, even though we didn't write any code. So if you go to room here, this room is black. Now that's normally what happens if you just open up like a notepad and start writing code. If I want to, I push play right now, we're going to get that blue square. If I'm just straight going to code, oops, I haven't dropped it in. Left click on this and then drag and drop it in here and let go, left click, boom, now you got a thing. Now where this is at also is coded. That's part of coding. So if I put it up here, then you'll see that its origin is down here. You'll see the pixels. It's based on this middle origin right here is 30 and 34. Now if I actually had it totally centered, it'd probably be like 34. There you go, 34 and 34. That's truly centered. So this means that from the left-hand side of the screen, which is 0, the way that GameMaker sees a room, that is, it sees all this space right here, is based on the left-hand side, which is 0, and then the right-hand side, which is your x-axis, which is, what I have it set to 1024. So the width right here, 1024 pixels. So it's 1024 pixels wide, and it counts it starting from 0 from the left, and it counts to the right. The Y position, up and down, your vertical, is 768 right now. And so it's counting 0 from the top. This is just how it works. So it's kind of confusing sometimes because you write a positive number and it means it's going down, and a negative number means you're going up. So you start from this top here, and now you have 0, and then it goes all the way down to 768. So from 0 from the left to the right to the center is 34, and then 0 from the top of the square to the center is 34 pixels, because this is a 64 by 64 pixel square. Now, if I wanted to make this appear here, I just click play. Now, if you're working with a language that doesn't have any sort of visual graphic interface at all, where you can't do anything like this, you have to code this to appear. So you have to code an object, tell the object, so, and all this is done for you with GameMaker, which is awesome, so it saves a lot of time. So we're going to pull this here. Now it's going to now it knows that this is where the square is because it knows that its center position. It knows how big the square is, that it's 64 pixels. It knows that its center origin point is here, and that it's from the 0 point to that center on the x-axis. It's like 226, and from the top to the center, it's like 254 or something like that. Anyway, so it knows that. And then if you run the game again, it'll draw that. I'm just going over the most basic stuff because it's important to understand for someone that's getting totally new into coding. They don't know anything about what's happening. Why this is happening is important because this is all code that's being written by GameMaker. Okay, then we got to start writing code now. So let's go back to double click on our object. I'm going to left click on this thing over here to close that window. You can always open it again by going like that. You can also open and close this one on the right hand side. You can see it turns blue. Boom, boom. Okay. Hold down your middle mouse button, that is the scroll wheel, but click it down like a button, and you can move this around, so it's kind of cool. Again, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit here, just for this is big enough for the YouTube, make it easier to see. All right, so I like to go in. The first thing you usually learn how to do if you're learning any sort of coding is how to write something on the screen like hello world. There's no point to do that here because this draws stuff for us automatically. Now we could still draw stuff on the screen. We can draw shapes, we can draw things like that, but I'm going to get right into movement because I think that'll really help understand more what I'm trying to get at, the basics of what it means to code and why stuff means what it does, so that when you follow along with Shaun Spalding and stuff, you'll better understand what it is they're talking about. Wow, 12 minutes and we haven't written a line of code yet. It's okay. All that was necessary to understand where we're going. So let's say we want to move left. Well, how do we move left? How do we tell the computer that we want our object that's in this room? So we have a black room, we have our blue object here. How do we tell the computer we want to be able to move this object left when we hit left key? And so that's what we're going to do. All right. I could have probably went like this, and I think that'll make it to where it stays zoomed in. All right, so we can use a function that's built into GameMaker, and it's built into it a couple ways. One is built into the GML, so you would type keyboard check. Now keyboard check underscore, oops, keyboard underscore check. When you type this, and it shows you there's different things you can do. You can do keyboard press, keyboard release. This right here, this function means if you just press the key once. This is if you're on releasing the key, and this is if you're holding the key. So keyboard check means holding the key down, which is good for movement. That's how you typically hold a key down when you want to move around. So keyboard check, and then we got to tell it what key we want. And you can see at the bottom, it's kind of hard to see here, but if I scroll up here, if I type in something like keyboard check, and then you should just know you have to click the bracket. It gives you options down here. It's telling you, well, what key do I want? So always look down here because this gives you hints at what to do with that function. And if you're ever wondering what a function does more, just middle click on it and it'll tell you things that you need to know in the help section here. So it'll tell you what these different functions do. It'll give you examples of it, and you can see it's giving an example right here of how it's done. So keyboard check, and we're going to go VK. Now VK, it tells you what that means. That just means virtual keyboard. Underscore. So far, this is all like what you're used to, but trust me, we're going to get into stuff that you don't know yet, most likely, and it's really important to understand. So we're going to put left. So now we told what does this mean? What have we told the computer? Well, this function has code built into it. So the people that coded GameMaker have coded this to have a lot of code into it that's telling the computer to do something. It's telling the computer a bunch of lines of code that basically say, hey, keyboard left is being held down, and then you're going to do whatever you tell it to do. And then also it's built into it when that key is let go, stop doing that thing. Because if not, it would just keep doing that thing. So it has to tell it to start and stop it. So it's built into this function. It's a really helpful function. No one's going to not want to use this function. They're not going to want to code around it. There's no reason to do that. So now the computer knows, okay, keyboard left is being held down, but then what? Nothing happens. So we got to tell it to do something. So we don't want it to just do something like right away. We want to use the if statement. Now what the if statement is doing is it's telling us now this line of code is totally different. This line of code is now saying if the keyboard, if the left key on my keyboard is held down, that's what it's saying, but that's all it's saying. It's not doing anything. Now typically how people would follow if is with brackets. So you'd have like these closed, what are they, squiggly brackets, or I forget what people, brace brackets, I forget what those, the technical name of those are. But anyway, so you can close your what you want to happen within these brackets. Now people write different ways. You can literally just write it on this line. So we can say, before we get into variables, I want to get into the most basic stuff of what's happening. So we would say x, when we hold down the keyboard, we want x equals x. And since we're going left, we're going to go -7. You don't have to actually have those squirrely brackets here, but it's good to get in the habit of, even if it's on the same line, I recommend just throwing them on there, the curly brackets. Throw those on there so you get in the habit of doing it, because other programming languages, that's going to be mandatory. And it's just a good habit to get into. It also helps kind of see what's happening on the line even. So now what you're telling the computer is that if the left key is held on the keyboard, then do this right here. But what does this mean? So and why is it written like this? There's other ways to write it, and I'll talk about that in a second. But what this means, in fact, how GameMaker writes it is really, really interesting. It does it differently than this. It actually adds a plus and minus sign in there, but which is unnecessary. So now we're taking basically what this part right here means. X equals X is it's telling the computer, it already knows where this object, remember this is being written inside of our object player. So everything in our step event is if our game is running at 60 frames a second, then every 60 frames it's going through this 60 times. You know, if it's truly running at 60 frames a second, then every second it's running through all the code in here a bunch of times, which is why you want to have the least amount of checks as possible to make your game run as you can. Now a create event, if I put a create event into my object player over here, so object, and we throw a create event in here, this will run one time when the I'm going to have to convert it. This will run one time when the object is created. So when this object is drawn into the game room, everything here will run one time. And this is where you want to put things like variables and stuff like that. So right now it's reading over and over again. It understands that it's checking, is the keyboard left checked? And whenever it does find that it's checked, that's why it happens instantly, because it's running through this code really, really fast. And if it is, then it's going to make this happen. And what this part right here means, because the computer already knows where the X position of this object is. So remember, this is object player. This is this blue box. That's what this code applies to this object. If I had another object and a step in that object, every code in that step is only applied to that object. It's not applying to my other object. So this code is independent of this object. So what does X equal here? This is the reason why I had to go through that, is to understand what X means. X is my object. It's the X position of my object, so the horizontal position of my object in the game world. And so if I'm saying that X equals X, I'm saying that my player's position is going to now equal its X position where it's at. So it's just basically telling the computer that, here, go back to room. It's telling the computer this is where we're looking at right here. X equals X is telling the computer this right here where I'm pointing at. The center, the origin point of my object. So it's telling, because remember the origin point has an X and a Y too, and then so does the place of my object. So I'm saying this is where we're pointing to. And then I want to add it. So if I want to move this thing to the left, right? If it's here and I want to move it to the left, so many pixels, I have to tell it plus or minus. So minus means I want to move left, and positive means I want to move right. You don't have to put a positive number. A positive number is written without a positive. So 7 is positive, -7 is negative. Another thing that's understand is it's now, once you say X equals X, you're telling it to move from this position. So this position now becomes 0. So once you tell X equals X, you're saying that this is the position, and that number now equals 0. So what is -7, 0 plus -7? It goes negative, right? So if you think about a regular integer line, the center of the line is 0. Everything to the left on that line is negative. Everything to the right on that line is positive. You remember doing that in school, so that's what this is doing, the same thing. So this becomes the 0 point of that line, and everything to the left is negative numbers, everything to the right is positive numbers. So -7 is going to jump from here to 7 pixels to the left. The more pixels you jump, then the faster it's going to go, because keep in mind that it's applying that when you're holding that key down, it's applying 7 pixels. It's running through that code 60 times a second, so it's applying it many times at room speed. And so the faster your room speed, the faster you can get it to move, right? Or just make the number bigger. Okay, so that's what's happening here. So we're saying x equals x, we're at the origin point. Remember, the origin point on our sprite right now, let's go back to the origin point on our sprite, is right here in the center. So I have middle center checked right here, and that's where it's at. So it's saying from here we're going to move this object 7 pixels to the left, because we're saying negative. I don't know why all that went away. Let's go ahead and bring this back up again. Okay, so now that we understand what that means, I wonder if that's kind of big. Maybe I wonder if that's big enough, especially if you watch this in HD, watch it in the highest quality. But just in case, I'll go like that, in case you're on a phone or something, make it easier to see. And now if we hit play, we're going to see that we can actually do that, and the computer understands that's what we're doing. We're just getting started. Trust me, all this kind of stuff, if you've already, and that now it works, if you've already understood why this means what it does, what I just explained, trust me, that same kind of knowledge is going to come down. If you don't know what those other lines meant, like HSP equals move times move speed, and why you have a times there, and what all that means, and why all that code is the way it is, I know that Spalding uses that something very similar to that code a lot in his movement. It's quite common to use that coding, but to just use it and not know what it means, how can you then adapt it to your own thinking and how you want to change things until you understand? So I'm going to do that same kind of breaking down stuff in the same way so you can understand that code as well. Okay, well, let's just move on here, because now we're going to get into stuff that's pretty much the same. So we know that now that you understand exactly what this means, what would it mean if x equals x plus 7, or x equals x 7? What would that mean? That would mean the opposite, right? That would mean that we're going right from our, so it would say our position, wherever our position happens to be at any given time it's running through this code in real time, and say, okay, now let's apply the right key, and we're going to apply, when the right key is pressed, we're going to add 7. We're going to move 7 pixels to the right of that center point of object player. Instead of having to rewrite all this, we can just copy it. So highlight it and then Control-C on the keyboard, or right-click and copy. And then paste, Control-V. All we have to do is change this to a 7 and change this to right, because we want, when we're holding right, we want to go right on the screen. Right? That's all we have to do. And now when we hit play, we understand why we wrote that code now. We didn't just write code and go, okay, cool, now we know exactly why we wrote that code. Oh, did I, I don't know why I did that. I put the brackets, I don't know why it ran before. Yeah, okay, there we go. It should go away now. Am I missing something? Did I type something and not know what I typed? Oh, I guess you have to add plus 7 here. But those should have been in there behind the 7. I didn't even see that I did that. That shouldn't have been there. You could put it at the end of the line if you want to, but typically I don't do it at the end of a line with brackets on, with curly brackets on it. Okay, so now it should work, and now we have left and right movement, and we understand why now. So we know that it's taken the center position, x equals x. Either way, it's taking that center position, x equals x, and if I hit left, it's taking the x equals x, that center position, which is 0, and it's adding -7, which means I go this way on the line. Because remember, anything left of 0, which is here right now, we're telling x equals x, we're telling 0 is right here in the center of my thing. Remember, the center, if I had my origin point up here, then x equals x would be here. But because we have it set to the middle point, so again, if I move this, let's say I go top left, then this is 0, 0 now, or this is x equals x, this is 0 now. But we want it from the middle. All right. And so now when we run it, oh, I'm already running it. That's why. So when you go left, it's going to go left. And when you go right, it's going to go right. And so it's just adding that. So if you wanted to go faster, you just make those numbers bigger. Now we'll get into what variables are and stuff in a little bit, but let's go through this first. I'm going to go ahead and just write the next one out, because this one, you should know, if you want to go up and down, is if this was like a top-down shooter or something like that, then your up and down movement when it is not going to be based on a jump button. But I can go through that too. But for now, we're just going to go up and down for right now. Keyboard, check, and we're going to go VK. So if we wanted to go up, we're going to pick VK up. That's easy enough to understand. And then now I'm just going to do the curly bracket again. And now we're going to do Y equals Y plus, -7, -7. And I'm going to go into, like I said, another way to write that would, by the way, any of these lines, you can write it as X minus equals 7, or you can say Y minus equals Y. These mean the same thing. So that means the same thing as X equals X minus 7. And X plus equals 7 means the same thing as X equals X plus 7. Right, those mean the same thing. So if you want to rewrite it that way, you can, but I recommend sticking with the other with this writing first, because that way you can understand exactly what's happening. I think it makes it easier to understand what's going on. So this means the same thing as the X, but it's on the Y, so in the up and down position. So now it's saying my Y equals Y. So again, it's putting me to the center of my object, or at least wherever you have your origin point, and we have it in this middle center right now. So it's going to be in the middle center, and it's saying that's 0. But remember, Y is the same kind of line, but it's going up and down. And so anything that's from the center of my square and upward is a negative number. Anything to the center of my square and downward is a positive number. So -7 is going to go, okay, this is where you're at. We're going to add -7 to that. We're going to move up now. So now you can see I can move up. I'm sure you've done all this before. And if you haven't, then that's great too. You're learning. But if you've already done all this before, at least hopefully now you're starting to understand it on a deeper level. And as we go more into this, you're going to start understanding other stuff on a deeper level, so you can really understand. I'm just doing the same thing again, but we're going to go down this time. So at this point, I think you have a good grasp on what's happening. Y equals Y plus 7. And this means the same thing as this. It's just the opposite. So now it's going, okay, y equals Y. That's which is now 0. That's the center point of your object, and we're adding 7 to it. So we're going to go down, because remember, positive is down on the Y position. And there you have it. So now we have movement code. Might be, not the best code in the world, but it works, right? We're moving where we want to move. We're understanding stuff. That's what's important. And then we're going to move on to understand even more cool stuff. Right, now everything moves. Okay, now what does this if keyboard check mean? And why is it better to use it than an event? Because if I want to write all this, I can literally write one line. I can copy it, paste it 3 times, and just change the positive here to, or the negative here to positive, for example, change left to right, and then change this to up and down, and then change this to YY, and change this to YY, and then plus, right? So I only have to copy it. It's really fast. I can do this pretty quickly. If I want to do the same thing, what this right here, if keyboard check left, this means the same thing as over here. So now let's go ahead and comment this out really quick. So we can select it all, right click on it, and we can comment selection. Now let's say we add an event. We add event key down, which is the same thing as keyboard check, and we say left. Now this event, which is actually a step event, is automatically writing that code for us. So that code is written into this event itself. So it's constantly checking to see if the key left is held down. And if key check, I have to convert this to GML. If key check left is held down, then you just want to tell it what to do. In this case, you would just say, let's say key left is X equals X minus 7. So you don't need the other code there, and if you do this, you'll see that it works. It literally is the exact same thing. And you can see that I can go left now. But I can't just write a bunch of code here. I have to do this for every single thing. So if I want to have another key, key right, key up, key down, I have to put all these things in there. Then I have to go, what about key shift if I want, a shoot button or a jump or key mouse? Anyway, it's just, and then from the long run, this creates more of a headache. And so I don't recommend doing it this way. I just want to show you that's what this is doing in case you were wondering. We're not going to do that. Let's go ahead and delete that event. Oops, not duplicate. Delete. Okay. We don't need that. To undo this, just highlight it all, right click, and uncomment selection or uncomment section. There we go. All right, so the next thing is what if we get into, I think there's one more thing I wanted to show. I don't know if I want to show it in this video. I was going to show like what D&D is actually doing, and it's pretty much doing the same thing, except it writes this a little bit differently. I think it says x plus equals x minus 7 or something like that, which means the same thing as this. It's just redundant. So now what happens if we want to move things? So that's one of the things you'll notice in that code I showed you in the very beginning, is it flips the x scale and right scale of our sprite. So right now, if we open our sprite, so double click on the sprite here. If we open our sprite and hit edit image, hold control, left scroll wheel, or not left scroll wheel, one scroll wheel that you have on your mouse, use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out, or you can use these buttons up here. I'm going to use a bigger brush. I'm just going to use white, that's fine. Make a line. Now he's got a smiley face. Doesn't matter how it looks. Let's go back to workspace. All right, so now we have our object player with a smiley face on him. I'm going to go and zoom in on this a little bit. If I hit play now, you'll notice that if I hit left and right, that the character doesn't flip. I'm just going through all this for those that don't know this kind of stuff. If you're just here to try to get to the more advanced part of this I understand. Just keep like fast forwarding until you find it. Right, nothing happens. So what is it? This is a really important part to understand, and I think a lot of people know how to do this. They know how to flip the x scale because they've done it enough times. They just memorized it. It's kind of like if you memorize 5 times 5 is 25. You can memorize that without ever learning multiplication. And you can come off as if if you memorize, like let's say the multiplication table up to 12, you can do that without ever knowing how to multiply. And so if someone said, okay, well, what's 105 times 7? You'd be like, I don't know, I didn't memorize that. Because you literally don't know how to do math. You just memorize the multiplication table. And so you're like, yeah, 5 times 5 is 25 because you memorized it. But what does that mean exactly? If you don't know what it means, then you don't know how to multiply. And it means you have 5 sets of 5. So 5 piles of 5 apples each, and you add them all together, you get 25. And once you understand that, then you can do any number. You can multiply any number. And then, well, maybe not. You have to learn maybe some other rules of how to multiply big numbers together, just like rules of adding big numbers together. So anyway, my point is that by the time you're done with this right now, you're going to understand not only how to flip the x scale of your object, but what exactly it means, so you can use that and think in that same logic and use that logic in other places of your coding. So the first thing is a way to do this. So once we have set up our movement, now we want to set up, I'm just going to double line here so it's a comment code. And now we're going to set up a way to flip the sprite. And so if we want to flip the sprite, there's several ways to do it. But first I'm going to go through the most basic way to understand what's happening. And then we're going to go back and we're going to start getting into variables and learn how to reduce this code more of how you would see it presented by like Shaun Spalding. And by the time all that's done, you're going to really start understanding why he codes that way. So if we do if keyboard check, so there's different ways we can do it. Now you might think, well, why can't I just, if I want to flip my x scale, so what does image x scale even mean first off? So image x scale, and you can actually middle click on this and it will tell you what it means. It'll give you an idea. So notice how if you have -1, or you have the original, then you have 0.5, then you have, is that -1 or 0.1? So it flips it the opposite way. So it flips the image around. Now it'll also stretch the image. So if you keep going with positive numbers, it'll keep stretching this image bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'll show you that in just a second so you guys can see what I'm talking about. But understanding this, that if we have 0, it does nothing to x scale. If we have +1, it'll flip it to the right. If we have -1, it'll flip it to the left. That's important to understand with this function, because now we can use this function not just to stretch our image, because that's typically what it's used for. Like if you wanted to make a jump look more powerful, an animated jump, you can, during the up version of the animation, of the sprite animation, you can say X scale, and you can like stretch it by 5 pixels or something, and or 10 pixels, and it'll look really cool as it stretches up, and then you can have it stretch back down. Okay, so that's what X scale does. In this case, we want to use it to flip our sprite. Remember, this is our sprite, and if we flip our sprite to -1, he'll face to the left. But then we need to be able to flip it back to the right again, otherwise, it doesn't work right. Okay, so that's what image X scale does. And then, so we might think, well, why can't we just say something like, so we're working with the X, why can't we just say X equals X minus 7, and that if that is true, say if that's true, then flip my image X scale, let's say equals -1. It doesn't work. You can try it. It doesn't work because it's not telling the computer enough information. It knows that, like X equals X, but it's not, for some reason it needs to know that the left key is being pressed down. Because remember, this has a lot of extra code in it that this doesn't have contained in it. This is just a true value based on this. And so anyway, what you have to do is you have to say if keyboard check VK left. So what we're saying here is we're saying now, just like up here, we're saying the same thing as we did up here. We're saying if keyboard check is true, and this is, so if the left key of the keyboard is being held down, that's why if is true. If you want to say something's not true, just put a thing in front of it. All that means is now the computer understands that this is not true. So if it's not true, so if it's true that I'm not holding down left, then do something. That is, if I'm doing anything else other than holding down the left key, then that thing would happen. And now we want to say something else. Now, the way I like to write, if you want to write the brackets because you want to write several lines of code within, like if this is true, you want several things to happen. I like to do it this way. I like to hit the enter key, hit the tab key, hit my curly brackets, hit enter twice, hit my curly brackets again, which automatically brings it right below the other one, hit up key on my keyboard, and then I would type my thing in here. I like it to look like this. That way, if I see an if statement like this, I know the next curly brackets and everything next to it applies that if statement. And if I have another if statement in that if statement, it would bracket it again. So it's always right next to my if. That's just how I like to do it. You can do however you want. We're going to go ahead and write it like this. This is going to be the same thing as this up here. This is just on the same line. This is written on different lines. They do the exact same thing. So it doesn't matter whether this is on the next line. I can take this whole entire thing, in fact, and I can put it on the next line and it'll do the same thing. Okay. So now we want, if we press the left key on the keyboard, we want something else to happen. We also want our image X scale to change. And it's more logical to do it this way anyway, to do it with the key, because if you base it on the speed of whether your character is moving 7 pixels, what if there's something else later in the game that makes your character sometimes move that, then it would flip, and if you don't want it to flip, then that's not good. So now we're going to say image X scale, and we're going to say that it equals -1, like so. In this case, I can put, because it's like ending a sentence. These end the sentence on their own. Now this ends this sentence. It's not necessary to be there, but other coding language it is. So what this is saying now is that if I'm holding down the left key, then this is true. It's going to flip my image by -1. So remember, so first off, image X scale automatically knows the center position. So just like X equals X, so it automatically knows X equals X. It's built into the function. And so it says, okay, X equals X, and it's basing it on my origin point. In this case, it's in the center of my square. And then it's going to go, okay, based on the center of the square, -1 means we're going to flip your image, and we're going to flip it around. If you say like a big number, it's going to flip it a lot. So watch what happens here. Now when I hit right, nothing happens. When I hit left, it flips it. When I hit right again, it doesn't flip back because you didn't tell it to. The computer doesn't know to do that. It just knew to flip this way, and then nothing else happens. It runs through this code again. Now it's flipped left, and there's nothing else to ever tell it to flip back right again. So we need to tell it to flip back right again. Otherwise, nothing's going to happen. So that's how that works. It's kind of cool. It's very similar to this, you know, it's like I said, it's built into it, and then it's -1 is flipping it. If I made this a bigger number like -4, it's going to start stretching. And this is very useful if you might want to use that scale, like I said, for jumping to stretch. Or if you want, like, let's say you have a run animation, and while you're running, you might want to stretch your X scale by just a little bit, like by 2 or something. Let's just go ahead and do that now. And that way when you're running, so you have a run button, and then when you click the run button down, also X scale by 2, so it looks like, you know, that's a little bit too much. And then you would want to have it return back, so return your X scale back down to -1 after that was done. So after you're no longer running, or after that animation is played. Okay, so that's what happens. So now we see that's what it does. Now you can now knowing at this point, if you're totally new, hold down Shift and hit Tab to bring your cursor back like that. You can also hit Delete, but if there's words there, you want to get used to doing Shift Tab. So if I wanted to bring my cursor back, I can bring it back like that by Shift Tab, hit Tab like that without deleting it. If you hit Backspace, it might not delete either, but sometimes it will if there's multiple things selected. So it's just good to get used to doing that. Okay, so understanding how all this works, everything that we've gone through so far, you should be able to, if I want to flip my thing back the other way, you should already know how to do that. If you just think about the logic and think about what we've learned so far. Oops. And what we understand now based on how it was explained. Again, I like to go like this, Tab. That doesn't need to be there. If it's just one line, you can leave it all in one line like we had up here. It doesn't have to be like this. So I'll give you a hint. It's obviously image X scale because we're still going to want to change the X scale. But we want to flip it the other way. So and I hit left here. Hey, maybe you're already like, hey, why'd you type left there? If you question why I typed left there, it's good because it means that you know how this is done. You're like, hey, that's not supposed to, that should be something else. It should be right. So now when I press right, which remember to the center point of my character, right would be positive numbers to the center of my character, so 0 and then positive numbers. And so we know we put a +1 here now. And we just type 1. We don't have to do +1. So now it's going to flip the other way, right? Because this code is saying the same thing as this one. It's just the opposite. It's saying that based on the center position, so if I'm holding down the key, then make this happen. So if I'm holding down that right key, then it's going to take my image X scale, and it's going to go from that center point, that is the XX center point, and it's going to flip it on the XX axis to the right. It's going to stretch it to the right. In this case, it's going to stretch my image all the way back around. I'll actually show what that looks like in Photoshop in just a second because it's kind of, I think it's good to understand exactly what it's doing so you can understand how to use it. So now if I'm pushing left or right, if I'm pushing nothing happens. But look, if I push both buttons, it kind of geeks out a little bit. You can get rid of that by using, like, there's different ways you can do it. But just if you had to try to think about it now, how would you go about it? Understanding what you understand right now. All right, so it might be a little bit louder in here because I had to turn on the AC because it's getting too hot in the house. But I have a pretty good microphone, so it should keep the noise down to a minimum. All right, so continue on here. So once we understand all this kind of stuff, how can we get into the other code I showed you in the beginning to understand that? Well, the first thing is we have to understand what variables are and why it's a good thing to use them. So the first thing is that a variable is going to store information. So to create a variable for a player object, all right, so to do that, we're going to create a create event. So remember, like I said, the step event is going to run this code over and over again. The create event is going to run that code one time when that object is created in the game. So we're going to up here create an add event. We're going to create event. Should have automatically went to it. I don't know why it didn't do that. So when we go to a create event, we want to add our variables here. So one thing we can get rid of that we don't have to write over and over again is our speed, right? So right now our speed is 7. This is our horizontal speed, which is 7, and our vertical speed is 7. What if, that's good for a top-down game, but what if later on we want to make that speed different and we have this 7 written all over the place in our code? When our code expands and gets huge, then you have to go change all those 7s if you want to change your speed. So if you have a variable that holds that number, then you can just change it there and it updates everything. So how that works is we're going to type HSP over here. You can type whatever you want, but for me this is good. A lot of people use this. Don't use hspeed because that's a built-in variable unless you know what that variable does. You don't want to use it. You want to use your own variables. So HSP is going to be equal to whatever you want. So in this case 7. So now my HSP equals 7. Easy. So everywhere I write HSP, it's the same as writing 7. It means the same thing now. So that's one way to use a variable, and it saves a lot of time for updating your game later on. And so now if I just change the 7s to HSP, then it means -7. And here just means 7. Now I might want to make one for vertical speed as well. For now, I could just made it speed, but I guess I'm debating whether I want to make it separate or not. Yeah, I guess we might as well. I don't think we're going to get into the vertical movement yet, but we'll just go ahead and make that equal 7 as well. And now we'll have VSP, and that can have a space there, and VSP. Okay, so now all that means the same thing. This just means 7, this means 7. The code, it looks different, but it means the same thing. We can also put, this into a variable. So you can say that left equals if blah, blah, blah. Or just rather, not if, you would just say left equals this. And then later on you can say if left, then do this. And so forth. So that helps a little bit. So now we run the game, we're going to see it works exactly the same. Right? But I think it's important to understand how to use variables and what they mean so it doesn't get confusing later on when we start using them. You can store all kinds of stuff in variables to do things you want to do. There's also temporary variables. Now, what's another way we can start to write all this out so that we don't have to write as much code? Like I said, you don't have to write all this. This isn't necessary, but I like to write it because it just makes it work smoother. But we can write all this in a very different way. We can write all this in a different, well, we can't really write this in a much different way, but we can write it a little bit differently. So first thing we can do is, I think I'm just debating whether I want to get rid of all this. I think I'm going to go and get rid of all this right now. Yeah, it's going to get rid of all this right now. And let's start. Well, I guess I can leave the if keyboard check parts just because we might use some of those. So for now, I just want to get into left and right. So I'm going to get rid of, I think, everything except for the left and right for right now. And I'm going to just get rid of all this for right now. So we're going to go back to here, and then I want to add one more variable. And also I'm going to make these 0 for right now because we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to learn something really cool and how to look at things a little differently. So move speed. Don't worry about abbreviate everything. You want to make sure that you understand what all this means. And if you don't understand what this means, and also you want to make sure that if somebody else looks at your code, this is pretty standard. But move speed, you want to make sure that it's something that someone that's never looked at your code before can understand what you mean by this. In other words, a stranger should know what your variables mean. So for now, we want to use a temporary variable. So we've already learned what variables are. What's a temporary variable? So a temporary variable, var move equals, and we're going to make it equal right or left. So I'm going to go through this in just a second, what this means. I'm just copying and pasting. Now I can get rid of these. Okay, so you can also, remember, you can left click on this and it'll tell you what it means. Oops, I don't know what just happened there.
I have no idea why it just did that. And you can go through, there's local variables, global variables. You can go through each one of these and see what they mean. And they'll tell you, how they run. So basically what this one is going to do is it's just going to create the variable for this part of the code that we're running. And it's not going to be used necessarily anywhere else except for right here in the object player within this instance. Okay, so variable move. Now what we're doing here is we're actually storing something in the word move. Right, so this is the actual variable move, and it's yellow because it's a temporary one, or whatever you want to call it. What do we want this one to equal? Right now we want move to equal this right here, which seems kind of complicated, but it's really not. And we can put stop at the end of this. We want it to equal, so every time we type the word move, we're typing basically all this out. So to save ourselves from having to type this out every time, we have the word move here. So stored in this word move is all this right here. And this right here means that if keyboard right is pressed, then minus if keyboard left is checked. Now what this does is it basically makes it to where if I'm pressing right or left, move will know which one I'm pressing, whether I'm pressing right or left. And then you add this next one. This is the one I think that a lot of people, that it's not explaining like what this means. And we're going to times move speed. Remember we have our move speed variable in the create event. I don't know why it's not adding. Is it because I'm zoomed in? Oh, I know why it's doing this. It's because I'm in the what's it called? I started this as a drag and drop thing for a different video, and then I've just been converting everything over. It doesn't make a difference, it's still going to work. So our move speed is equal 7 right now. This is important to understand, and remember HSP equals 0 right now. So what this means right here is our HSP equals 0, and now we're saying 0 equals move times move speed, which is 7. So 0 equals move times 7. Well, what does that mean exactly? Well, to the computer it doesn't mean a whole lot because move means this right here. Alright, so this part got a little bit messed up in the video, so just kind of fast forwarding it so you guys can understand what this part means. So basically what the computer is understanding with this first line of code is that if the right key check is pressed, the computer understands that as a positive one, and if left key is checked, the computer understands this as a negative one. The minus is if they're subtracted from each other, you get 0. And so what HSP equals move, so then move times 7 is if nothing is pressed, or if both are pressed, then it's 0. And 0 times move speed equals 0 times, remember move speed is 7, 0 times 7 is 0, so you just get a 0. That is, if you press nothing or press both keys simultaneously, nothing happens. Which is a good thing. That's why I like doing it this way, because you don't want two keys to be able to be pressed and cause weird things to happen. But if the right key is pressed, then that's positive 1, positive 1, move, positive 1 times 7 is 7, and then left is negative 1, negative 1 times 7 is negative 7. So now HSP basically equals either 0, or it equals, if you're pressing right, it equals positive 7. If you're pressing left, it equals negative 7. So HSP has one of those three values depending on what you're doing with the keyboard. Negative 7, 0, or positive 7. So now we can use that to do something like flip our X position, or within the X scale, so that if you're pressing right, then that would be a positive 7, and then you can turn that to a 1 and flip it right. And then if it's negative 7, you can use the sign function to reduce that to negative 1, which will flip it. And I explain that more in just a bit, but anyways, that's what this code here is doing and what it means. Just don't forget to not put the ifs there, because ifs are not supposed to be there. I don't know why I put ifs there. I been tired and wasn't thinking. But yeah, so yeah, this is what is going on here, and this is something that I just don't hear explained when this part is done. All right, let's continue. Now nothing happens. We can't move, we don't do anything. And it's because we could flip though if we, like I said, if I had some other flipping script, like the old flipping script we just had a second ago, if I use that flipping type script, let me see here, do I have something I can use? I think I have this right here that I had saved, and let's just apply. I just want to show you what will happen. That it is recognizing, but it's not going to move us anywhere. So we can flip, but we can't move anywhere. That's because we haven't applied our X position. Remember, in order for it to, right now we're just saying we have this variable, but this variable is 0. Remember, HSP is 0. Move speed is 7, but HSP is equal to this. But if I'm pushing left and right, it's just saying that I have right, that's a positive 7, but it's not applying it to anything. It's not applying it to my X position, so nothing's happening. So now I have to apply this to my X position, otherwise this all means nothing. And so now I'm going to say X equals X, just to tell the computer, okay, we want my center position of my sprite, and what do we want that to do now? Now we want, we want now to add that HSP. But what is this HSP exactly? What's the value of it? It depends. The value of it is 0 if I'm pushing nothing. The value is plus 7 if I'm pushing right on the key, and it's negative 7 if I'm pushing left on the key. That's what this does right here, along with this. But that's what this is telling us. Now we have something that'll happen. So now, because we have applied something, and this is a cool way to go, it's basically a cool way to say if I'm pressing left or right on my keyboard, it'll go left or it'll go right. And I deleted the other line of code that would tell it to switch. So then you can just ignore all that and just go right to here like this. But this wouldn't be the best way to do it. You wrote all that code, why not use it to move left or right with just one line? But everything works now. Everything works the exact same way it did before. So the lines we wrote before were very different, but this is accomplishing the same thing. So this is accomplishing movement, and these same lines of code we wrote last time are the same lines of code that are accomplishing flipping the thing. But now that we have written it this way, what's the benefit of writing this way? Well, one benefit is that we have variables, so we can just update these variables to change our speed. So I can just update the 7, and I can also apply the 7 to my vertical speed. And so now I only have one thing I need to change if I want to change stuff. And so if I change this one number, it updates all my code, and now I'm going faster. So if you just change this to, let's say, 20, just so you can visibly see it. Now if I press left or right, it's going to go very quick. Yeah, very quick. Whoa, I'm fast. So how else can we flip our image sprite using all this? And this is why it's good to look at other people's code, but it's good to understand what that code means, because it might be hard to figure. It took people years and years to figure all this code out, like how, years of people designing games and learning from each other and keeping secrets from each other for people to figure all this out. But now it's all there. Why reinvent the wheel? But it's still kind of a good mental exercise to go, okay, we know image X scale, what it does now. Image X scale flips something. Well, if at least it stretches something technically, but if we flip it -1, +1, it flips the image left or right. So we know what it does now, at least what we want it to do. But how else can we get, besides writing it this way, how else can we get it to do that without having to write all this stuff down? So one way we can do it is we can use the HSP, because remember, HSP is going to tell it to do something, to flip left or flip right. Positive number is going to go right, a negative number is going to go left. The problem with that is it's a big number, -7 and +7, so that's going to it's going to stretch our image out. It's not just going to flip it. But we can still use that. So one way to do it, we'll do a long way, then a shorter way. So one way you might have already thought about is, what if you just go, if HSP, so that is if my speed, which is, in this case, it's going to be either, remember my HSP, depending on whether I'm pushing left or right, is going to be -7 or +7. If I'm pressing right, it's positive. If I'm pressing left, it's negative. That's important because now I can just say if HSP is less than 0, or less than or equal to 0. So if HSP is less than or equal to 0, then that means what? It means I'm moving left. Because remember, 0 is the center part, the XX. It's my center part of my sprite, right in the center of my sprite, and that number is 0. If I'm not moving, then my movement speed is always 0. That's the XX part, not moving. If I'm moving, that number, if I'm moving left or right on my X, or rather, if I'm moving, my X is either positive or negative. Remember, X is just a horizontal line. So that means that my HSP, which I've set to be this plus this, means that if it's less than 0, then I must be, or equals 0. Equal to 0 would mean that I'm actually, I'm not moving. But if it's greater or less than 0, sorry, then that means that I must be moving to the left. In this case, less than 0, just imagine it pointing to the left. And then if it's pointing right, it points to the right. So this is an easy way to memorize it. If, see, the thing is pointing to the right, this means that's to the right of the 0, so those are positive numbers. And remember, all the numbers to the left of a 0 are negative numbers. So if I'm less than 0, then I must be in negative numbers. And what negative number does this represent if I'm going left? Negative 7. So basically this is saying if negative 7 or 0, then I want to, let's see, how can we do this? Image X scale equals negative 1. And so now, and I can go like this. You can put this in brackets if you want to make it easier to kind of see what you're doing. Even though it's on the same line, you don't have to, but it's good to have it there. So now what will happen is when I press left, well, actually it's going to automatically flip it because it's also, remember, it's also 0, so my bad. We don't need that equal sign there. Otherwise it's equaling 0, so it's saying if it's equal to 0, if I'm not moving, then to flip it. So now it's only going to flip it when I turn left. But if I go back right, nothing happens. So now I have to tell it to go back right. And I could write another line of code, but I think I can say, let's see if this works. Else, I don't think else has to be there. Yeah, this is pointless. I mean, I guess it allows me to write on one line. Else if HSP, I'm debating whether or not where I want to put the brackets. I'll just put them here. Else if HSP is greater than 0, and then we're going to, I'm debating whether I want to put other, I'm going to do it. Actually, no, it's on one line. There's no reason to put all these brackets. This can look really crazy, silly if we like put this on separate lines, but there's no need to. Then we'll say image X scale equals 1. I'm going to put a bracket here just because of the else statement. I can show how this will look if you were to write it out like with a bunch of lines, which is unnecessary. And then there's no, you can also just write on 2 lines. You can write this and this on separate lines and it'll do the same thing. Else isn't really necessary here. And so now you can see it flips. So what I can do is I can take this else out because it doesn't need to be there. So let's take all this out, put this on its separate line. And then I can just put this in brackets like that. And the same thing is going to happen. Else was unnecessary. Right, so 2 lines of code, everything works the way I would want it to. Okay, but now, is there another way I can write this out? Another way I can use this now that I have that HSP. Can I write this as one line? And actually, you can. What you can do, and this is how Shaun Spalding, and a lot of other people, not just Shaun, a lot of people write it this way. And this is one of the benefits. And also, this would be just left and right because they would put this inside of variables. You can do that too on, if you wanted to, on right above this. You can put it on the step event as variables because you're going to be using those over and over again. So if HSP is not equal to 0, so now what we're saying, well, if our HSP is not, and this is where you'd have to really think about it a lot. To come up with this logic, you'd really have to think about it for a while. You would have to be like, how can I make this one line? And you'd have to presume there's a possibility to write that as one line of code rather than 2 lines of code. But you can't, because remember, HSP can be either one of these. It can be a positive or a negative number depending on which way I'm pressing. So HSP is 7 and -7 depending on whether I'm going anywhere. So if I say that it's not equal to 0, then what does that mean? That means it's either positive or -7. It has to be one of those two. And if it's not 0, then nothing's gonna. If it's 0, then nothing happens. That is, whatever I put after this, it won't happen. So my image X scale won't happen if 0, but if it's positive or negative, it will happen. So I say if HHP is not 0, then I say image X scale. And I can't just say image X scale is equal to -1 or +1 because that's contained within HSP, whether it's a negative or positive number. So then I can say it's equal to HSP. Now this isn't going to work right yet. And do you know why? I'm going to help you understand why anyways. But what's going to happen if I run this game right now? Just try to guess it first. Try to guess what's going to happen if I run the game. Remember, HSP equals -7 or +7. So what we said now is, let's just assume I'm holding left on the keyboard. What this code does is it goes, okay, you're holding left, so it's not equal to 0, so you're moving. HSP now equals -7. Image X scale now equals -7. That's what just happened. So now when I move left, watch what happens. Left or right. It's going to go boom. It just stretches out to -7. That's not what we want. So how do we fix that? And this is where understanding other functions is important. There's a function that you will find yourself using all the time because there's a lot of things where you just want, there might be something delivers a big number like this, but you don't want the big number. You want just a -1 or +1. Remember this, there's other things too that work on -1 or +1 or 0 not 0, like that is basically, is it true or false, things like that. And so there's this function that comes in handy, and it's a sign function. Now what this does, and you can look at it, you have to put this in brackets after it now. That's just something you have to memorize. That's just part of the language. It's just saying that the sign is, with this here. So what sign is doing is it's taking that big number and it's returning and reducing it down. And you can just middle click on it. It'll tell you what it does here. But this is what it does. But basically what it does, it either if it's a large positive number bigger than 1, it reduces it to 1. So if it's 134, that's a positive number, it reduces it to 1. If it's a big negative number, -7, it now equals 1. If it's 0, it remains 0. So that's what sign does. So now it takes, it's basically, think about it, I don't know, kind of like multiplying or something, just transforms it. So now this was either negative or +7. Remember, if I'm holding the right key, then this says image scale equals 7, and it stretches me out the long way. But now this is saying if that equals 7, it now equals 1. And this is saying if HSP equaled -7, now it equals -1. And now we got image scale working properly. And so this comes in handy. The sign function comes in handy for all kinds of cool stuff. And so, yeah, hopefully now this little bit of code makes a lot more sense. We can take it a little bit further than this. But this is very similar to how, like really good coders will, like popular coders on YouTube will be writing movement and flipping your sprite. And now you understand, hopefully now you start to understand why it's written this way and what's happening. So now when we run it, just to show that it was working, I'm sure you've already ran it probably if you're coding right now. And it works. We have our left and right movement. Awesome, right? Okay, so there's another thing we can do though. We can actually reduce this. So this is for if you ever need to, if you know you're writing a big game, it's good to put your movement into variables because you might need to reference them many times. You don't want to always go and write this whole entire thing out every time you want to reference a movement. And so what Shaun will do often and other people will do is, let's say right equals, and remember, you don't want your variables to be super short. Like you don't abbreviate it to that, because who's going to know what that means? Just make sure that it's easy to understand what it means and serves a purpose. Right equals keyboard check. And because the reason why you don't want to put this variable in the create is that only happens one time. this is something that will be checked all the time. So after the game starts, for example, after the game starts, movement speed equals 7. Everywhere this is in the code, it knows that it equals 7, and it's just a number. But if it's an action you have to do, like pressing a key down, it's not going to work here because it has to check it all the time to see if I'm pressing that key down. So this variable has to be in my step event to know that if I ever press that key down, it knows that right equals keyboard check VK right. And even just little stuff like that, I find that there's no explanation for it. Like why? Like they just go, well, put this in here, or they might say put this in here because it. I just don't. They don't. I don't know. I feel like there should be more explanation to what's happening and exactly why that's happening. Now I can change this to right because it equals the same thing now. Right. So this equals this, and so now that equals that, and now everything's good. Right. So this is basically there, and I can write another line, and then say left equals. Oops. Keyboard. I'm not used to. I also write novels, so it's weird sometimes writing code. I find myself if I'm writing a lot of code that when I want to end my sentences, I'll end them like that instead of with a period, and then vice versa. Like it depends what I'm doing more of at the time. Now we can change this to left because it means the same thing now, right? So left means this. It's the same thing. And so now when I press left to right, you'll see the code will still work. Now, the reason why that's beneficial, I know it can get confusing. So you want to get used to, if you use certain variables, you want to get used to those variables and what they mean. So right and left is really simple for me to understand. Hey, that means left or right. My character's going, because it applies to my player, so my character is going left or right. And you can add other codes to this. It's really simple. Like if I wanted to update this to have a different movement code, I can. And if I get enough requests in this video, I know I don't have very many people that watch this channel anyway. I don't ever like advertise or anything, but nonetheless, stay tuned in the future. I'll probably do a video on a good way to write your code out, how I wrote my code out for my game engine, so that you have all the shortcuts, but also that you could either use your controller or your keyboard. And it's a really easy way to do it, and an easy way to update stuff. So you'll have a good controller function and a good keyboard function, and either one will work depending on whether or not your controller is plugged in. Yeah, so there we go. We had to go through all that just to get here, that we finally understand what all this means. So now hopefully now when you're watching like Shaun Spalding or Heartbeast or somebody that's showing how to do a cool coding thing, and they do different stuff like this, you understand why they're doing it. Now there's other things that happen too, and that's with scripts. This video is so long now, I don't know if I can include scripts in here, but basically you can write something in a script that you're going to be using several places. So if you find yourself using the same little bit of code over and over again and having to copy and paste it into different objects, and all those objects are sharing that same copy and pasted code, you can make your game more efficient by copying that code into a script and then calling that script. So let's say this isn't a code that we would ever use. For example here, because it's this object player, I don't think you'd want other objects to be controlled with left or right. But just to make the point clear, let's say this code was going to be used by several other objects, and you don't want to copy and paste it. Although it doesn't take that much time to copy. Let's say you have 100 objects. That's a lot of copy and pasting. Either way, you have to copy and paste something either way. So it doesn't like save you a whole lot of time, but it does make your game run better and smoother. And so my game uses a bunch of scripts because it's just the best way to do it. All right, so we're going to copy this. We're now going to delete that. We're going to go into our scripts. We're going to right click and we're going to create a script. I wasn't going to do this, but whatever, we'll do it. And we'll call this, trying to think what we call this script, something that relates to what we're doing. So it's player movement. We'll just, yeah. Just make sure it relates to what you're doing and that another person can read this code and understand it. Now double click on this to open that up. I need to make that into GML because it's not. Zoom this in a little bit. Up here, type in 3 lines. This is where you can describe things. So now I can name it my player. This isn't the same as a comment. The 3 lines can actually do things. You can have arguments in here. Like in this part here, I can have different arguments that would carry over, different variables that would carry over anywhere I had that script, but it would change those variables in the script. Anyway, that's getting more complicated, but all you have to do is this. If you do that, you don't have to do that, but it's nice to have it named so you know when you're looking at it that you can see this, that's where you're at. And then I need to copy and paste that, which we just deleted. So now it's here. And let it update. There we go. So now when the game runs, nothing's going to happen because we're not calling this script up anywhere. So player shouldn't do anything anymore. Player has no movement. Nothing happens when I press buttons. And why is that? Because this isn't being called anywhere. I have to call all this back up into my player object. Again, so if I had, let's say this, let's just pretend for a second, this code, I don't know, made enemies jump around or do something. I don't know. It's something I needed to be in several objects. And I don't want to just copy and paste it all. Then let's say jump movement. Let's say this was enemy movement. So this wasn't keyboard checking. This was just the AI for enemies to detect ledges and to move away from them and walk the other way. I don't want to copy and paste that code everywhere because it's going to be more efficient if I have a script for it. Well, here, now I have a script for it. Now all I have to do is copy this right here and paste this anywhere where I normally have to paste all this code. I only have to paste this script now, and that's where it'll be. So go double click on your object player to bring it back up here. We're back in our step event. We're going to zoom in. Now you can also, I think you type description, whatever you want, if you want to name it, but I'm not going to do that right now. Anyway, we're just going to do comment, and the comment will be something like player movement stored in scripts. And if you want to, you can even say, even though it's in a B right underneath this, you can still say that's in player movement. Then you'd want to just copy and paste that. The name that we have here just has to match the name over here. So player movement, and then has these 2 little things. I mean, I like to put that at the end of it, to end the sentence. Now it's calling up that script. So anything that was in that script, it's when the game runs, make sure it's in a step movement on to create movement. So now anytime the game runs and it draws my object, it reads this goes and reads the script, and it brings it back to the object. So now the object is running that player movement. So basically it's just storing that piece of code I would normally write in here into a script. And this also helps keep your game really tidy when you start getting crazy. Like you don't want a step of, imagine if you have like pages and pages of code all doing different things in this one step of your object player. Now you can like break it up in different things like player movement and player collision and things like that. It just makes it easier to manage. And this is important to understand, especially if you ever buy my engine. My whole engine's done like this. And so yeah. So now we run the game. You're going to see that it calls up that script and everything is voila. Dance, dance, dance. Right? Everything's good. There you go. All right, cool. Hopefully, guys, this helps out. And I just noticed that on YouTube, there's just not a lot of people that teach exactly, what is the code doing exactly, and why are you doing these different things. And so actually, I did want to just describe a couple more things I forgot to talk about. And that I told you like what this does, and but why do you write certain things a certain way, for example? And this is the language. So remember, all this code is based on machine code, which is based on binary code. And so there has to be certain ways of writing symbols that makes it kind of understandable to a human, what we're writing, but also understandable to the machine, to a binary machine. And so that's why certain things have to be written certain ways with certain symbols. For example, when you technically would, I think, write this like this if it was in C or C++, like that. Actually, no, not if it's just key. I think that's only if that's an if statement or something. Anyway, you can write it like that, and it's not gonna break anything because it's just saying it's contained together. This it wants to separate. This is like within this. It's almost like a folder within it. So this is like a little code within another code. So this is a certain code, a function that is telling to look for a keyboard check, whatever. And then this is the little bit of code that tells what key is being pressed, and then if that key's let go. I'm not sure how much code is in each thing, but that's kind of how it's kind of separated into ideas, and so that's why you have to write these brackets in there. It's important, and there's certain times if you don't write the bracket. I mean, GML is very forgiving versus other languages where they're not so forgiving. Everything has to be exact. This one will forgive a lot of things that you do or don't do. Like I didn't put a thing here. It doesn't care if any of these are here or not. But it's good. It's good to get in the habit of putting them there. And so there are times where you absolutely need these brackets, like because it's especially if it's part of a function and it's in that function. Like for example, what if we wanted to use like I'm trying to think of one. Draw, make. Okay, what if we wanted to do this one, for example? We wanted to make color hue HSV. Well, actually, I could change this to RGB. It's another function. And if I wanted to make something a certain color, I can apply this to a certain color, and then this would be, make it that color. At the bottom here, you'll notice that there's red, green, and blue. So the RGB values of each red, green, and blue, you have to put these in brackets, and they have to be separated with commas. So let's say I do 122, and then I do 43 for green, and I do like 244 for blue. This is going to be a much more bluer color, but there's quite a bit of red in there, so it might be kind of a bluish purple color. I don't think by itself this will do anything. Maybe it'll change because remember, this script is now running into the player step, so it might actually change player, but no, it doesn't. Okay, I'd have to actually apply it to player, which I could actually. You can actually apply this one time only with the press of a button. So I can say something like if HSP, I don't know, less than 0. I just want to see if this works. HSP is less than 0, then let's do image blend. Actually, I think I can just do image blend without even having to use the make color. Or will it blend that color? I don't know. Let's find out. I've never done this before, so I'm just kind of curious what'll happen. It should be if I hit one of my directions I want to go. So if I hit right, nothing happens. If I hit left, yeah. So notice only if I hit left, and then once it does, it stays that way. I would then have to. So it's coloring my image. It's blending this over. It's blending this color over my image when I press left, because remember, my HSP can be positive or negative number, and if it's only when it's less than 0, which means I'm going left. That's why when I press left, that it changed this color, but when I press right, nothing happened. Although once I change color, it's permanent. It stays that color. I would have to then do something else and say, like, well, if not that, then let's change my color. Let's change my color back after I hit right or something, or after I let go of the button, so it's only temporarily while I'm holding it. I don't know why you'd ever do this. I just wanted to show that, that I basically just wanted to show that these brackets are necessary in some things, and that's where it's absolutely necessary. But yeah, so that's why you do certain things. And there's other ones where the brackets are different. So the brackets they'll be square brackets. Some things like an argument 0, argument 1, those would be in square brackets. And these are just things you have to memorize. That's just the way it has to be. It's just the way that it's the way that the computer can understand that it's separate and what it's looking for. So it's really all, you don't have to understand it on a deeper level than that. I just understand what it is and what it's looking for. But yeah, so yeah, let me know if this helped you. If it did, leave a comment in the comment section. I'd love to hear any kind of comment. Just help the video grow. By the way, how YouTube works is the more comments and the more likes it's getting, the more likely that YouTube will show that video to other people. So if you really find a video, like if you really find this video helpful, the best thing you can do to help it out, if you want more people to learn from it and find it, is to comment on it and thumbs up it, and then also subscribe and hit that bell notification if you want to see more from me. And yeah, that's going to help a lot. That's what you can do as an individual, really help a lot. And if you really find it helpful and you belong to any forums, you belong to a GameMaker forum or something like that, and you think this will help somebody else, you can always copy this this link and save it. So if someone ever goes, hey man, I'm having a hard time understanding the basics and like I'm watching Spalding, but there's a lot of stuff that he just doesn't explain, you can just post them this link and they can go through that and go, oh, that's really cool. That was really helpful. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Appreciate it. If you have any requests for anything else, let me know. The next thing I might be doing is going through the breakout. It actually comes with GameMaker. It's free. It's the breakout tutorial. I'm thinking about, there's already a video on YouTube made by the Yo-Yo, the people that make GameMaker, the company that makes GameMaker, and it's a female that does it. And she does a pretty good job, but there's a lot of stuff that when I'm like looking at it, because I was like, when I first was trying to understand all this stuff, it's like really hard. Some of it to me was like, why is it that way? And I have all these questions, and so I might go through that entire thing and just do the tutorial, but do it in a way like this so I can break it down to we understand what everything's doing, why it's being done. So that way, and hopefully like how to take like how we took different logic that we've learned and we kind of like reapplied it to new things. Like for example, actually one more thing I want to go through with, we have no vertical movement right now. Let's say I wanted vertical movement. How would we do that? Yeah, actually this tutorial isn't complete unless I do this. Hopefully you're still with me because I was saying bye and everything. You probably thought, oh, okay, he's done. I'm going to stop watching it. But then you might go, wait, why is that video so much longer? So let's say we'll say up. This is our variable. We're going to say up equals keyboard check. Now you should know what this is going to be by now because we've done this enough times. It's going to be VK, and we want to put up. Yeah, you guessed it. That's what it is. VK up is up on the keyboard. So now we have an up thing. Nothing happens yet because we don't have anything applied to up. So if you wanted to add movement, how would you do it? Like where would you, knowing everything we learned so far and what we understand, we know that a negative y number is going to be up. So how can we make up? Well, we can say if keyboard check up, one simple way to do it would be if keyboard check up, then so we can say if up now, because we don't have to say if keyboard check, but it's the same thing. It's as if we wrote if keyboard check up. Remember we did that before for the x value. Then what's going to happen? We just want it to equal something. So we want it to equal y equals y. So that's our y position of the middle of our character, which is now 0. And we want it to equal something like -4. Actually, let's make it a bigger number for now just to make sure we can actually see it. -7. And so now it's going to pop up 7 pixels when we hit up on the keyboard. That should go away now. There we go. So it was just waiting for this bracket. Oh, by the way, if you ever want to see what brackets belong to what, you can just click on them like this, and it'll show you what brackets belong to what. Like it's saying, if I click on this, see how these are both highlighted? It means that everything in this is applied to inside the brackets. That really comes in handy when you have a lot of if statements and stuff together, if and else statements together and stuff. So now if we hit play, remember this is in the script, but remember the script is being called by a player. So anything I write in the script is going to be called by a player and brought in. And so now you notice if I hit up, I can go up, but it goes up indefinitely. So maybe I don't want VK up. Maybe I want to change this to something else. Well, what other options do we have? Well, let's just check. Let's go like this. Are there any other options? Oh yeah, look at this one. There's a keyboard pressed. What can we put in keyboard pressed? Probably the same thing, but maybe not. Maybe we want up to be a different button, maybe space. And you can check different keys too. If you wanna use like A or stuff like that, you want to use ORD, and this should and this should bring up the. Well, you have to do it like, come on. I'm just waiting to see if it. Actually, don't DVK. You just do ORD. I'm just trying to see if it brings up different keys. I guess you'd have to go look at it, but I think it's A would be left. I think that's how you do it. I haven't typed this in a little bit. For now, let's just do VK space. But like if you wanted left and right to be A and D, you can do that really easily. And I'm trying to remember how. I think if you just go to keyboard, I think it'll show you all this. So yeah, that says the function ORD, and then you have you need the brackets, and then you need the. Let me see. I think it shows an example in here. Keyboard input. Yeah, so you have to do ORD and then you have to do the brackets. So it's the ORDs in brackets and then the A's in brackets and parentheses. And then that allows you to use any key on the keyboard. And you can easily check this too, like you can say right equals this or this. So either one would work. So you can say equals or I think you do these, but I like it because this just changes color. It lets me know that something's definitely there. And you can say or keyboard check, and then you would say ORD, and then you would want to do parentheses. And let's say so right would be D. Then I want to get rid of this here. And so now when I run, it should run fine. I can either probably press right or D. So D and right, D right, both. So it works good. And I still go, oh, up is spacebar. So now notice when I hit spacebar, it just goes up that, it instantly goes up and then stops. There's nothing else left there. So let's change this to like negative, make it a big number. Since our character is so big, let's make this like, I don't know, 20 or something, see what happens. Okay, so now we figure out how to make the character move up when we press space, but that's all that happens. That's obviously not what you're trying to go for. You're probably trying to go for a platformer so that it will go up and then it will come back down. So obviously we can change, you know, we can change it to one of our one of the remember the player still has the crate in it, and it still has that VSP in it, which right now is this equal to 0. So we could start using, you know, VSP for our vertical speed. The main thing is you want to be able to bring your character back down, but there's really no point in bringing your character back down with gravity right now because there's nothing underneath the character. So there's no collision, and you can do a quick collision by not having to write collision code. There's a really easy way to do that, but then you can use the gravity to bring it back down. But anyway, I'm not going to go into all that. I just wanted to just really quickly that I could like break down an actual tutorial or something, or break down movement as commonly taught for platformers. All these YouTube videos pretty much do the same thing when it comes to platformer, how it all works. So, but anyway, you can kind of see like we were able to figure that out. Hopefully you're able to figure that out with me, how to get that to work, and it was pretty simple. And then now if you wanted to go further with that, try to go further with it, try to think about, well, I guess if you don't know anything about gravity or you know, but if you start watching somebody else, I think a lot of this is, it's everything they're talking about is going to make a lot more sense to you. And yeah, all right, so I'm really done this time. Thanks for watching. All right, bye.